tensions escalating in the Middle East after Iran launched an attack on Israel. This is not the only conflict, of course, that's affecting the world. Today also marks a year since civil war broke out in Sudan. So still on international news, President Cyril Ramaphosa will today be meeting with King Mswati III before traveling to Uganda and South Sudan itself. Let's take a look at all these big stories for you and distill them. Bring in SABC international news editor Sophie Mokoena, who's with us in our studios here in Auckland Park. And what a time, really. I mean, I think you'd be forgiven if you thought this was a script from some kind of movie, given just how many bouts of very serious war have broken out in the last decade, quite frankly. In the latest iteration, Iran and Israel, it's a animosity, I think, that has existed for many years, but I think few people would have seen the events of the last weekend take place.
Yes, indeed. As you know, that often when there are tensions between Iran and Israel, you find a situation where Iran doesn't act. It will threaten, but it doesn't act. For the first time after many years, Iran decided to act and deliver on what it said it will do after Israel killed some of their diplomats in Damascus, in Syria. And therefore, many people didn't anticipate that Iran will strike, and they did just that. Now the question is, how is Israel going to respond? And if Israel does respond, will Iran be able to intercept the drones or the missiles that might be coming from Israel? Do they have the type of capability Israel had based on the support of the United States of America and countries such as the United Kingdom, who were able to intercept these missiles? And therefore, the Middle East is in crisis, the whole world is in crisis, and I agree with the economist earlier on saying that no one is immune economically.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we were having a discussion off air around who's best placed to intervene. I mean, the United Nations already has been discredited by Israel, and that took place even since the October 7th attack by Hamas. The Israeli government seeing the United Nations almost as a player in this conflict more than a referee. I wonder then who that leaves us with when it comes to mediating and at the very least de-escalating the tensions.
I'm tempted to go back to my exclusive interview with the UN Secretary General when he was in South Africa during the BRICS summit. He warned that the world is drifting apart, countries are drifting apart, and the United Nations Security Council is now paralyzed. And indeed it is, because the permanent 5 members with veto powers, all the time, it depends who's involved. They took decision not in the interest of the world, but in interest of their own understanding of issues and economic benefits. You see, when there's a matter, a resolution before the UN, the P5 members will not agree, and P5 members will use their veto power to derail whatever resolution that must be taken. It happened during Ukraine war when it started, even now, and now the Middle East, it's the same issue where you find these P5 members, big countries who are using their veto power, stopping whatever attempts and efforts to ensure that we find solutions to these issues. And I think the time has come that the international community, ordinary citizens of the world, call out those countries, these big countries that are abusing the veto power. And I think at the moment it speaks to there's no one who can be a mediator, a credible mediator, in terms of all the challenges that we are facing because of these P5 members. We must call them out. They are really abusing their veto powers.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm reminded, and you'll remind me of the exact date, I think it must have been 2 or 3 years ago when the very influential general in Iran, Soleimani,
Yes,
who was killed by the US. At the time, there was real talks of some kind of potential World War III because of that. It almost felt like we're at a precipice. A lot of that sentiment is coming up again, and I wonder to what extent you reckon there's credence to people who are throwing around that kind of rhetoric at the moment.
That's why I was saying previously, you'd find a situation where Iran will threaten and they didn't act. I mean, the killing of Suleiman.
Yeah.
Everyone was waiting to see the reaction from Iran. Later on, there were other attacks and they didn't act. And now this one, they took a decision to act. I think it's because the environment is conducive in the Middle East for any country to take any decision. The war in Gaza has divided the region. The war in Gaza has affected neighboring countries. They've taken sides and they feel aggrieved. And Israel is now in danger. And people did warn. I remember I spoke to the former South African President Thabo Mbeki, who warned that this issue will affect neighboring countries and Israel will lose its credibility in the eyes of the international community. The same was said by the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and then, of course, the former ANC veteran or the ANC veteran Tokyo Sexwale, even sending a strong message, Tokyo Sexwale, to Benjamin Netanyahu that be careful, you are losing credibility and the world will gang up against Israel. And unfortunately, ordinary people and citizens, particularly the Jews around the world, will suffer. And therefore, please exercise caution and be a leader. Unfortunately, with Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel is not going to get out of this mess. And now he's using these conflicts to stay in power, because you can see there are protests in Tel Aviv every evening. They want him out.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, even the opposition have to rally behind him right now, as we saw what happened yesterday with the war cabinet having to approve a decision to retaliate, because now they also feel aggrieved, because when you attack the country, then it becomes a different issue. So at the moment, I don't know, a miracle maybe.
Sure.
Even yesterday at the Security Council last night, there was no unity in terms of where to from here, particularly to stop the war in Gaza, because then it will assist in cooling down the temper in the Middle East or in the Gulf region. And even the economy is going to be affected. Look what's happening in the Red Sea, where the Yemen rebels are attacking vessels that are carrying goods. And therefore, the economy of the country is going to suffer. The supply chain is going to suffer. The oil price will definitely go up.
Yeah, and we know what that does for the cost of living, even as far out as the tip of Africa, I beg your pardon, where we're at. Whilst there's a lot of attention on the situation in the Middle East, there are concerns that not enough attention has been placed on Sudan. The conflict there is now marking a year, and there's real worries. In fact, I think the term that's being used is that this is quickly becoming the forgotten war.
Yes, indeed, because it is a dark continent, Africa. Nobody cares. It started with the war in Ukraine, because you have pockets of conflict on the continent, but all eyes are on these regions, the popular big regions, where the North has got vast interest and influence. And therefore, Sudan, DRC, is forgotten, including Cabo Delgado. And people are continuing to die, ordinary citizens. I think also this it reminds me of what the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, said when I asked him about the global challenges. He said, let's start on the continent. Why, as leaders on the continent, we can't resolve our own differences and the conflict that is engulfing the continent in Sudan. The same was said by the current president of Namibia, whom I spoke to last month, saying that, yes, my country is small, I can comment about what's happening in the Middle East, but for me, of critical importance, it's what's happening on the continent, and we have to do something. This morning, Mbeki issued a statement calling on all those who will be converging in Paris today at the donor conference to raise resources for Sudan to help ordinary people, that as you raise these resources, you cannot forget that the war is raging on. Channel all your energies in terms of stopping the war in Sudan. We'll see later today at the UN It will be a commemoration of that conflict in Sudan started a year ago. We'll hear from the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, who has been talking about this conflict the whole of this week. And now our attention is in the Middle East.
Sure, yeah, because of what's taking place over the weekend. And I wonder then, keeping that in mind, what we should make of this. Is it a multilateral engagement between the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and King Mswati III of Eswatini? They're going to two different parts of the continent, Uganda and South Sudan. For us who are trying to place this, help us connect the dots about symbolically what it may signal, but also bilaterally speaking, what they might try to achieve.
South Africa has always played an important role in trying to destabilize a continent. This is the policy, the foreign policy. It dates back to exile years. South Africa, those who were oppressed, having benefited from the support of the international community, know too well that you need peace and security for development to flourish. And if a country flourishes, the region will benefit. And therefore, they are continuing to address internal issues, but not removing eyes on the ball in terms of what's happening on the continent. And therefore, the president is engaging King Mswati III today. You know, there are issues there. You also have Hamade, who's really causing tension between Botswana and South Africa and Eswatini. The other issue, he's going to Uganda. Uganda, it's a continuation of attempts to find a way to address what's happening in the Great Lakes region, a continuation of the meeting with Paul Kagame last week, because you cannot address the issue of the DRC if you don't involve neighboring countries, because Uganda and Rwanda in particular, including Burundi, when these people fight, they tend to move to other countries and they launch attacks or retaliation or continue to propagate their displeasure outside the borders. And therefore, if you want to really resolve the problem of the DRC, you must also engage Uganda, you must also engage Rwanda and Burundi. And South Africa did play a prominent role during the Sun City talks, and they brought not only Congolese to the dialogue, but also neighboring countries, so that neighboring countries can assist rather than fueling tensions. And therefore, the president is going to Uganda. It will be bilateral trade and investment, but I suspect the main issue is the DRC. From there, he's going to South Sudan. You know, the newest state, it was South Africa that facilitated the cessation of South Sudan, Mbeki leading those talks. And South Africa has been babysitting South Sudan since then, building capacity, assisting them to find one another. In the same way, we did babysit the DRC in terms of capacitating the country, in terms of skills and public service. The same with Rwanda. South Africa did that. So South Africa has been playing that role, and I think Ramaphosa is also trying to look at that. While he is also, we saw him, he was campaigning. And also the Middle East. As I spoke to the diplomat from Norway on Friday, who was in the country to lobby South Africa to continue with its quest for peace, global peace, saying South Africa is a very important country in the world stage based on our own experience. We were the last country to be liberated on the continent. So we know too well oppression, discrimination, exclusion, and fighting. And therefore, we are a better example that can share expertise. And I think it is based on that he will be visiting the Great Lakes region and then later visit IGAD region, that is South Sudan.
Sure, yeah, and it seems increasingly South Africa is becoming a lone voice in the wilderness, given just the direction in which a lot of these regions are headed. Sophie Mokoena, always great catching up. Thanks for popping by and speaking to us about these many interesting and important issues. Sophie Mokoena, of course, SABC News international news editor.